Good evening. I'm Judy Sanford, guys. I'm a member of the board of PeaceSmiths, Inc. And I will start with one very important thing, and then talk a little bit more about PeaceSmiths. But we are a 501c3 organization. This is not a political event. We do not endorse candidates. We don't support one candidate over another. But this is an educational event. We feel that it is very, very important, particularly since we're an organization that for over 30 years has been working all over Long Island in the area of peace and justice issues, individual rights, environmental issues, housing issues. It's very, very important for our audience, our public, and the video public to be able to hear presidential candidates speaking on a variety of issues that relate to peace, social, and economic justice.
Representing Barack Obama, we have Mark Cronin. Representing Hillary, would you like to, if I wave to people? For Hillary Clinton, we have Maureen Luciani.
Luciani, hi.
Luciani, okay. For Dennis Kucinich, we have Doug Viviano.
That's right.
Okay. For John Edwards, we have Mark Finkel. And for Ron Paul, we have Chris Garvey. And for the Draft Nader campaign, we have Jerry Kahn. And respectfully, we have, they declined to appear.
We have chairs for other...
Mark Huckabee, that guy from Law and Order, Thompson. What's his first name? Fred Thompson. And we have empty chairs for John McCain, Rudy Giuliani, and Mitt Romney, and Mike Huckabee. I can't see the other person.
Well, yeah.
Oh, Fred Thompson.
He did send regrets, as did Mr. Thompson.
So we're going to open up with 7 minutes from each, and we'll go in order from Barack Obama to Hillary to Dennis to John to Ron to the Draft Nader campaign. So we'll start with Mr. Mark Cronin.
Thank you.
Why don't you
And my name is Mark Cronin. I live in Huntington. I grew up in Huntington Station. I like to reveal to folks, I left home when I was 19 and swore I'd never come back to Long Island, which is why we bought a house here 10 years ago, and that's where we're raising our 3 boys. Actually, one of my earliest memories as a kid was coming down here to Amityville High School to get a polio vaccine, which would have been in the early 60s, I guess. I'm a volunteer. I'm a dad who's raising 3 boys. I'm a writer. I was a registered independent up until this summer. And that's when I joined the Barack Obama campaign, and I did change my registration so I could vote in the primary. I thought it might be helpful if I could give you some personal testimony as to what brought me to do that. And it really started back before the invasion in Iraq. On Martin Luther King weekend, before the invasion, there was a large rally down in Washington, D.C. And I felt vehemently that what our government was about to do in our name was wrong. We took our 3 young boys, my wife, we got in a car, we drove down to Washington, D.C., listening to Martin Luther King speeches along the way, the ones that don't play in the schools, including why I'm against the war in Vietnam. I don't know, some of you may have been there. There were 200,000 people standing out in the Washington Mall. It was 8 degrees out, we were freezing. And part of that felt very good. because I was standing up for what I believed, and I was demonstrating to my children, this is how we should act as citizens. And part of it was terribly depressing, because it didn't matter. Because I was standing out there freezing, and it didn't matter. Because the occupant of the White House and the people in the Congress were going to go ahead and do it anyway. I had written to my 2 senators in New York. I had called their offices. It didn't matter. And that felt terrible. And I made a vow that I was going to do something about it, so I didn't feel so helpless. So I didn't watch my government go and do something which I thought was so wrong. And I noticed Barack Obama, who did take a stand against the war. And I noticed other things about him. I noticed that he went to Iowa early on, and he stood before farmers, and he spoke about the need to help the farmers. But he also spoke about the need to change and lower farm subsidies. And he went to Detroit, and he spoke to the auto workers union, and he told them about ways in which he wanted to help American labor. But he also told them, we have to make a better car. We have to make a more fuel-efficient car. He went to Florida, and he spoke before Cuban Americans in Florida, a very conservative group, many of whom have a lifelong animosity towards Fidel Castro. And he told them, you may not like to hear this, but we need to normalize relations with Cuba. And what I noticed was he was a man who was telling people not what the polls wanted them to hear, not what advisors were saying, but he was speaking from his gut. He was speaking about what he believed. And that struck me as being something very different and something worth supporting. In fact, recently, it was New Year's weekend, on Meet the Press, they split the time between Mike Huckabee and then the second half of the show they had Senator Obama as a guest. In the first half, Tim Russert does what he does. He was showing clips and reading statements to Mike Huckabee and then reading a contradictory statement and saying, how could you say both? And that's what happens with most of the candidates who appear on the show. It didn't happen with Senator Obama because he's been consistent in what he's been saying.
And now for Hillary Clinton, I'd like to bring up Maureen with Jim.
Hi, and thank you so much for inviting me here this evening. It's an honor and a privilege. And it's an honor and a privilege for me to speak on behalf of a woman who I have come to admire, who has inspired me, and who, like thousands of women in New York and the United States, has empowered me, and who has empowered millions of women across the world. I haven't felt like this since I was a high school student in the 60s and a college student in the early 70s. I've had an opportunity to work with Hillary Clinton, to know her, and I have discovered that in addition to being probably one of the most brilliant women I've ever known, she is compassionate and caring in ways that I hadn't imagined. I think I first I first took notice of Hillary Clinton as the mother of 2 young daughters. I live in Brightwaters. And it was the conference in Beijing in 1995 where she stood up and talked about human rights being women's rights and women's rights being human rights. And that was a moment for me. I think I saw her strength and her character, almost a spirituality, through the adversity that she went through during her years in the White House. I became involved just a tiny bit in her first Senate campaign. And I should say that I also am a volunteer. I'm taking an unpaid leave from my firm starting the middle of next week in order to do this. I got to, and one of the times I worked with her when she first was elected as senator is I had to prepare a briefing for her on environmental and farmland preservation issues on the East End. And I gave her this briefing book, which took me a week to work on, and she presented it better than I wrote it, and she maybe had an hour to look at it. I saw her with the New York City firefighters. I don't know if you remember after 9/11 when they booed her virtually off the stage. And what did she do? There's been no greater advocate for New York City firefighters than Hillary Clinton. Their health care and all of their needs. The strength and the centeredness to be able to do that and to not retaliate. I have a personal story. There's a woman many of you I'm sure have read about, Doreen Kenny. She's a Gold Star mom from Bayshore. And I work out with her sometimes in the Y, and one morning we're working out together, and I started to ask about the foundation that she has, which funds care packages for soldiers. And she said that she had gotten a call from a commander who needed coagulating bandages, and she didn't have any money left in the foundation, but she couldn't turn him down. So she put $7,000 worth of these bandages on her personal credit card, and she really didn't know how she was going to pay it. A few nights later, I had been invited to a thank you reception with Hillary Clinton for the volunteer work that I had done, and the people at my table urged me to go and tell the senator, which I did. She took my name and number. Next thing you know, I got a call from the staff. And the next thing you know, Doreen Kenny flies off the elliptical trainer as I walk into the Y, throws her arms around me and says, she called me on my cell phone, Senator Clinton, and she is gotten me in touch with the Intrepid Foundation, and they're funding the bandages from now on.
Dennis Kucinich. I want to ask Doug Viviano to please come to the podium.
Thank you. It's great to be here and be part of the democratic process. My name is Doug Viviano. I'm a father of three. I live in Brooklyn. And I grew up in Bayshore. And I escaped from Brooklyn heat in the summer on Long Island beaches. So Long Island's very important to me. I want to do something a little different here tonight that leaves our past with our present. So it's going to take a little bit more time. In honor of our national holiday celebrating Nobel Peace Laureate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., I'm going to do just that. I'm going to celebrate his teachings. 40 years ago, Dr. King made the connection of local problems with our national and foreign policies in his still prescient speech, Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence. My third reason moves to an even deeper level of awareness, for it grows out of my experience in the ghettos of the North over the last 3 years, especially the last 3 summers. As I have walked among the desperate, rejected, and angry young men, I have told them that Molotov cocktails and rifles would not solve their problems. I have tried to offer them my deepest compassion while maintaining my conviction that social change comes most meaningful through nonviolent action. But they asked, and rightly so, what about Vietnam? They asked if our own nation wasn't using massive doses of violence to solve its problems, to bring about the changes it wanted. Their questions hit home. And I knew that I could never again raise my voice against the violence of the oppressed in the ghettos without having first spoken clearly to the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today, my own government. For the sake of those boys, for the sake of this government, for the sake of hundreds of thousands trembling under our violence, I cannot be silent. I'll read one more short passage. A true revolution of values will lay hands on the world order and say of war, this way of settling differences is not just. This business of burning human beings with napalm, of filling our nation's home with orphans and widows, of injecting poisonous drugs of hate into veins of people normally humane, of sending men home from dark and bloody battlefields, physically handicapped and psychologically deranged, cannot be reconciled with wisdom, justice, and love. A nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. I repeat, a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than our programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. Dr. King was a great and courageous man. He gave his life breaking this deafening silence. Today, 40 years later, it takes another courageous leader to break the silence. Congressman Dennis Kucinich. Dennis Kucinich makes the same connections and speaks the same principles. This fall, at a protest of the School of Americas, Dennis spoke. Bear witness to the undeniable truth and to the imperative of human unity, that we are all one, that we are all interconnected, that we are all interdependent, that the founding principles of this country were not simply about a United States, they were about human unity.
And now, from the John Edwards campaign, we'll have Mark Finkel.
I was thinking of Reverend King tonight also. One of the little-known historical facts about 1968, the week before he was killed, he was asked by Jerry Worth of ASME, at great personal risk, to come down to Atlanta to go for the sanitation workers' strike, which ASME represented in Memphis. That is why I'm supporting John Edwards. Very simple. Workers' rights, people's rights. John Edwards is against NAFTA and CAFTA and Peruvian trade deal. John Edwards came from a poor family, the first in his family to go to college. In fact, during the whole last election, his brother was in jail, and he didn't lift a finger to get him out, even though he was going to be the next president of the United States. Because he knows that people have personal responsibilities, and to quote Hillary, it takes a village. And sometimes you've got to pay the price even for that. John Edwards, in the words of Barack Obama, has come through the politics of personal transformation. He admits he's wrong even, which is, I think, except for the politics of race, he is the only American politician in modern times to admit he's wrong. That was on the Iraq War. He started his campaign in the 9th Ward of Louisiana by building houses for Habitat of Humanity during the campaign. And actually, yep, that's correct. John Edwards, most importantly, against all 5 Republican candidates, and he's the only Democrat in every single poll who can actually win against all 5. No other Democrat on the current polling apparatus, whether it's Newsweek, CNN, or any other poll, one-on-one with all 5 Republican candidates can win and will win. So the question is, do we support the most progressive Democrat with the chance of winning? I suggest you check the Newsweek CNN poll, the most recent, and the last 10 Newsweek CNN polls. You can check it on any of the websites of CNN, CNN.com. I urge you to get involved in John Edwards. He's a progressive Democrat who can win. And you know what? 8 years from now, how many Jack Weinsteins will you have on the federal Supreme Court, on the federal court? I warned you 4 years ago. People in this room were supporting Dean and Kerry. What would happen? That we would lose. Not that I didn't work my ass off for John Kerry. Not that I worked my ass off for all progressive Democrats and even independents like Bernie Sanders, which I raised tens of thousands of dollars for through DSA. I'm going to urge you to get involved, whoever the Democratic nominee is here, because it's because the Yiddish concept, it's a shas hachak. It's an emergency situation to defeat Republicans this year. But I want to ask you, one more time, and this will be the end of my speech, because I promised to keep it under 7 minutes. Do you want to support a progressive who is the most progressive, viable candidate in the Democratic Party, who is also the most viable candidate in the fall? Because in everything we do, our president represents us and the people of the world. Thank you. You can contact me at markfinkel.com, or you can contact the campaign at johnedwards.com, or you can call me. I'm willing to take calls and get us organized at 516-538-9882, like I've been doing for 28 years for the progressive community on Long Island. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Welcome, sir.
And I would like to ask our distinguished representative of Ron Paul, Chris Garvey, to the podium.
There's one big difference between what Ron Paul is proposing and what everyone else is proposing, and that is Ron Paul wants to abolish the Federal Reserve. When you talk about economic issues, there is no greater impoverishment than the fact that the Federal Reserve, which is a private cartel of banks, has the power to counterfeit money, to create money out of thin air, and loan it to the government at interest. This is a private bank with private stockholders, and all the benefit of all the money that they've coined since 1914 has gone to the benefit of those banks. It's been loaned to the government. We pay interest on it. That's why they instituted an income tax, so we could pay the interest on the debt that was created by these banks, there's no reason for it, except that these people are very, very powerful. The private bankers who created the Federal Reserve are the heirs to the philosophy of the Bank of the United States, which after 20 years after Hamilton created it, the country declined to renew it. Jackson tried to destroy the second Bank of the United States. The assassin who tried to take him out, his gun misfired, and it took him several years to get rid of it, but he did. And America remembered long enough so that when Lincoln had to finance the Civil War, he did it by printing money rather than borrowing it from the European bankers. He was assassinated too. Garfield gave a very good speech against centralized banking. He was assassinated. But in 1914, on December 23rd, when most of Congress was on recess, a small group of senators and congressmen passed the Federal Reserve Act. It had been billed as the Anti-Aldrich Act, but it was the exact same act that had been defeated in open legislation the year before. It created a private cartel of banks called the Federal Reserve with presidentially appointed or government-appointed officials, but those officials could easily be selected so that they would serve the interests of the people who were paying to get them there. And they have been stealing your money since 1914, so that today's dollar is 96% less valuable than the dollar of 1914. So when you go to buy a house, you don't just use your earnings to buy that house. You have to compete against money that was created by the banks. And so that money bids up the prices of the houses, and so you can't just buy them with your salary. You have to take a 30-year mortgage and indenture yourself to the banks for 30 years and pay an income tax on the money you try to earn to pay off those banks. It is the most amazing rip-off that anyone can conceive of, and nobody understands it. Ron Paul is trying to get the message across that the Federal Reserve Bank is stealing your money, and you should put an end to it. Okay, what are the other issues that Ron Paul is talking about? He would bring the troops home now. He voted against the Iraq War. War is the health of the state. War is a good excuse to raise taxes and borrow more money and transfer more money from your savings and your taxes to war contractors, war profiteers. And these war profiteers give war profiteers a bad name from this war. Stop looting Social Security. save $1 trillion overseas by reducing our debt, helping veterans, children, and seniors, and cutting taxes. Bring the troops home. Why are we defending Japan? Why are we defending Germany? Why are we defending Saudi Arabia? Opposed WTO, NAFTA, CAFTA, and the NAU. These are not free trade. These are cartels. These are tangles of regulation which favor certain producers over others.
And from the Draft Nader campaign, we have Jerry Kahn.
Hi everybody, thank you very much for inviting me tonight. My name is Jerry Kahn and I'm with an organization called Greens for Nader. I've got some literature over there. This flyer will put you in touch with a website called draftnader.org. And it will give you an idea of what we as Green Party members are trying to do and why we're trying to draft Ralph Nader to be our candidate for president. Also, there's a, just a moment please, some background about myself. I'm not a native New Yorker or from Long Island, I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. And I joined the Green Party in 1980, I'm sorry, in 2000. Forgive me, it's been a long time. And I was with the Nader campaign, the Nader Cameo campaign, as staff, as a petitioner during the summer, and then with what we called Van 3. We had to get by on very small resources, so we actually had a van, me and another guy drove around New York City and advertised the campaign. We didn't have billions of dollars to spend on TV ads, so we did the best we could, and we did pretty well. In any event, what I'd like to just stress right here is that Ralph Nader has not announced yet, but he's expected to soon. We of Draft Nader campaign obviously are looking forward to this taking place as soon as possible. The great crisis of our time is a crisis of democracy. The big corporations, the big global corporations, and super rich people own and operate the government of the United States, the government of New York City, the government of New York State and other states, and they're completely out of control. And average, ordinary people have nothing to say about it. I used to ask people, when they'd say, well, what's the Green Party about? I'd say, oh, well, you know how all the big, important decisions in our country are made by a very small group of very super-duper rich people? We're against that. And people would, nobody ever said, what do you mean? I don't know what you're talking about. Super rich people controlling everything and big corporations making all the big decisions. Nobody ever challenged that. And yet for some reason, we have a situation where our two major parties do everything these people want. They give them a war that 80% of the public does not want. They refuse national health insurance when 70% of the public wants it. They refuse to move towards renewable energy sources because big oil is already entrenched and they've got all these people bought off. It's very simple. They have too much control, they have too much power, the average person does not have enough power. And frankly, since there are no Republicans here, I might as well just come out and...
Well, there is one.
There is one who's an ex-libertarian, as I understand it, which means he's not quite sure whether the real Republican. Oh, I thought he was.
He's got a dual passport.
Okay, well, he used to be with the Libertarian Party, as I believe. Anyway, the point is that the two major parties don't represent the average person. They are completely bought off by big corporations and by super rich people. Michael Bloomberg basically bought the office of the mayor of New York, and nobody is protesting this. I want you to go to a website, if you can, called tamethecorporation.org. Tamethecorporation.org. This will explain an awful lot about these things.